I have a not-so-secret agenda. I really want to turn everybody in this room into book UX knowledge practitioners for whatever part of digital publishing you might find yourself involved in, whether you are the developer, the publisher, the publicist, any part of it you can contribute to improved user experience in the products and hopefully evolution of better digital books.
We're still very much at the aping print stage of development with comics, even more so than with ebooks, I think. The page metaphor for the screen, the bundling of content into issues, these are all skeuomorphs designed to make digital comics familiar to readers used to the print artifact and to help make their transition from physical to digital less jarring, as Anne mentioned earlier. And this is a good thing. It's a worthy and necessary step forward. However, as we've seen in general computing, and most recently with mobile computing, the big switch to the flat iOS 7 in particular, it's time to move on from relying on skeuomorphs, and we want to get a little bit more sophisticated about how we create and consume our digital media. So what does a post-print digital native comic actually look like? Well, it looks like software. And if we want to start making books and comics like software, we would be very well served to look toward people who have been making software for years for some guidance on how to go about it.
Well, I think we get back down to the question of what's the intent of those specifications. Is the intent to give designers the ability to say that they know they're going to be pixel perfect design applied across every platform? Not really. Honestly, I think that the intent of the specification, the reason why the design aspect is not really dealt with as much, is because the specification is there to guarantee that reading systems can open the file, can know the structure of the file, and like Matt Garrish did a really good job of explaining, can handle the file in an accessible way. That's the goal of the specification. We can deal with the questions of design all day long, but every single book is different in design. And so there's going to be different needs for different books by different designers, published by different publishers across the entire world, depending on a variety of issues. I don't know the specification really needs to handle. The specification needs to be able to say, if you open a document and it's got Japanese, display the Japanese. And if it's supposed to go right to left and top to bottom, then display it right to left and top to bottom. But whether it's bolded with a bold that's this way or that, or it's got the ability to some sort of default specification on margins or something, those are things that should be done in the style sheet, and hopefully will be assigned, because we're using the same display engines across most of these platforms, will be at least understood in a consistent way. They may not be exact, but then again, that's the point you were making. It's not going to ever be exact necessarily. That's not the point of the specification, though, in my opinion.
A couple of points there is that, I mean, I'd be happy if just all of the ebook platforms stopped breaking valid books. I'd be happy if I could say this is a valid book and I can rely on this being readable and not break.
So why should we be talking about art books specifically? Well, there are a lot of pundits online talking and writing about the future of publishing, but they say publishers should do this and publishers should stop doing that. But the fact is that there are many different types of publishing, and I think we can all agree with that. What works for one type of publishing is not necessarily going to work for another type. Art books, particularly scholarly art books, which is what I'll talk most about, are very complex in content and in layout. And so while EPUB may be the best choice for fiction, it's not necessarily the best choice for complex art books.
I will start by saying that I've spoken about this probably 4 times before, and each time the message gets more optimistic. At first it was like, hey, we really have to push for typefaces in ebooks. We can't rely on just default faces. And then the next time it was, hey, there are ways of loading typefaces into ebooks. I'll teach you. Then the third time it was, hey, there's a whole slew of open font license typefaces that can be loaded into ebooks. And now we're on the verge of something insane where ebook licensing is actually starting to, font licensing for ebooks is starting to be rationalized. So we're sort of getting to a point where true typography in ebooks, at least from the embedding fonts perspective, is getting to be more and more reality.
we've spent a decade trying to imagine, you talk about, do you work within existing constraints and, do you imagine sort of beyond how horrible they are right now? Well, of course, my lab situation is we have to do both. Most of the technology has not nearly caught up to our imaginations. And we work with students who have incredible creative capacity and imaginations and translatable skills from all sorts of disciplines and areas. And we are always trying to push the technology and wait for things to catch up. So we are one of those labs where we've sent people out on 3 hours with an iPad out like that. And we don't kid ourselves. Nobody's going to make money by sending people out with an iPad. Nobody even really wants to do a mobile gaming experience as they run 3 blocks to get to the next hotspot. We're at this very weird cusp moment where the technology is just starting to catch up again. And things like Google Glass or more locally Meta might make a big difference, an HCI difference in terms of the kinds of stories we can tell and how long the questions can be.
I think the ultimate goal is to, like I say, to have comparable access to information. This is where everything else, all of the other good practices fall in, whether it's, making sure your images are fully described, whether it's, what do you call it, progressive enhancement. I'm losing my train of thought. Being able to enhance on top of scripting. So even though you're using scripting, right, we're not trying to say don't create fancy, beautiful, wonderful, interactive content. Nobody's ever said that, in accessibility circles. We're never sitting there and telling publishers, no, don't do this. It's always, okay, you're doing this, so what can we do to catch up and try to give this comparable access to information? Because that's ultimately the goal. Why should somebody not be able to have access to the same amount of information in the book as somebody who's cited? Simply because you're not using structured markup or you're not using best practices. It's a very, I don't want to call it deliberate, because as I said, there's lots of reasons why inaccessible content gets produced. But knowing these things and knowing the limitations you're putting on people, this is what we're trying to enforce. This is why we keep hammering at all of these practices over and over again and saying, pay attention, do what you can, start making, even small changes to make a difference in your content.
While it's important as craftspeople to care about the quality of what you do, you also have to justify it if you're in some kind of an industry. And this is an industry with sometimes very thin margins and a lot of competition and a lot of change. So it's important for us, sort of outside of our safe space, to make a case for why craft matters to the readers that consume our books in the end. But unfortunately, more importantly, to the publishers and the rest of the industry that have to fund this work. And I think, in particular, based on my experience at a company like Safari, I can give you some takeaways that will justify some of the craft that people are finally starting to put into ebooks kind of wholesale.